Hello, everybody. It's John Schneider, your host for another episode of Jersey Bayshore Country. You know, I always enjoy doing shows about history, and I always enjoy interviewing people that I know, that I'm friendly with, that I'm actually best friends with. And we're going to have that experience here today, at least I am. This is all about a new book that my good friend Robert Mayers has written. Bob is a historian, a friend, and has had actually some relatives serve in the Revolutionary War. And the book is called Revolutionary New Jersey, and there's a subtitle, Forgotten Towns and Crossroads of the American Revolution. I think this is what, number 6?
5.
5?
Yeah.
But you're working on 6.
Working on 6.
My gosh.
6 is a work in progress.
So good to see you, Bob. When you work on these things, how long does a book like this take you?
Well, from conception to the time I had a book in my hand, it took 3 years.
And what was the inspiration? What was the idea that you had here?
Well,
behind
it
the
followed
book?
a sequence of books that kind of fit together. The first book, as you might remember, I had an ancestor in the Revolutionary War, and I became obsessed with his life and wrote his biography. It was called The War Man, and it came out in 2009.
Right.
And it's been selling rapidly worldwide since then. It was
And
a
what was
great
his
honor.
name?
His name was John Allison, and he fought with the New York regiments. He was in the Army for 8 years under General Washington.
Wow.
So that led to, that raised a couple of questions in my mind. Number one is I kept stumbling across forgotten places that were critical battles and campgrounds in the American Revolution that were forgotten in history. So I wrote another book called The Forgotten Revolution, and I got that all together, and I studied about 20 sites ranging from the Canadian border on down to Virginia. And that did well, and another mystery still remained in my mind. Who were George Washington soldiers, the grunts, the GIs, the doughboys?
Right.
The American public had a misconception about those people for over 200 years. Our conception of the American soldier in the Revolutionary War was a zealous religious patriot that dropped his plowshare and ran out and repulsed the evil redcoats from the mother country and then ran back and started his
And
farming
you found
again.
out that was just not so.
That was nonsense.
Yeah.
And the American public believed it. The last book that was written on the soldier was in 1904 by an author called Bolton. I read Bolton's work, and it was around the bicentennial years. I started digging along with 5 other historians in various parts of the country, all working independently. And we found out that was a bunch of caca. The American soldier was the dregs of society. There were landless farm laborers, most of them, and they joined the Army, and I hesitate to say this, but one of the primary motivators for joining the Army and joining Washington was not patriotism. They did taxation without representation, not an issue.
Yeah.
They joined for the promise of to be fed, to get uniforms, and to get paid. All those promises were broken.
Yeah.
But they were obscure poor boys of the country.
And this book was Searching for Yankee Doodle?
And that was called Searching for Yankee
Yeah.
Doodle, and
Oh,
I
great
went the
book.
and I exposed it. I portrayed the real soldier of the Revolution. But you know, as I'm looking at these forgotten sites, I'm saying, you know, so many of these are in New Jersey. They're right around my hometown, and there's a lot of places on the Jersey Shore. George Washington spent more time in New Jersey than he did in any other state, and it's amazing that went on here, and even Highlands, where we are today, outside of maybe Princeton, Morristown, Highlands is the #1 historic town in the state of New Jersey, and so much happened right around here. So that gave rise to this book. That's a New Jersey book. It takes about 20 sites, and it's campgrounds, it's battles. It covers 100 towns. It's a long book. It's 400 pages long. And
I write things, nothing like this, of course, but this is a mixed blessing, isn't it, to work on, because it's a lot of work. It must be a lot of fun to research, but the research it's difficult work, isn't it?
The research takes the time. And my research, there's a lot been written about the American Revolution, and it's been written by other authors, and I work from primary sources. I work primarily from original military records.
Wow.
And the best records, strangely enough, are not American. They are French, they're British, and they're German. Because if you were an American soldier marching through New Jersey, this is pretty much like Virginia or Connecticut, where you came from. So you didn't write a diary, and you weren't thrilled about all the things happening, but these foreigners were. It was like Disney World marching through this land of rich Dutch farmers, abundant, beautiful women, fruit trees, the Patterson Falls. They were like tourists.
Sure.
And they wrote it all up, and that's where I get a lot of my...
Were you able to get this stuff translated, or do you speak German? And
It's all translated.
yeah.
Yes,
Wow.
it's all translated, and the wonderful thing that has happened for historians is the internet. I can go on the internet and pull up a book written in 1745, original book, read it, and it's fantastic.
So this is, you say, about 20 different towns and cities in New
It's
Jersey?
100 towns.
100 towns.
It covers 100 towns.
Yeah, and what's an example of a forgotten town or location?
Well, a forgotten town would be a town like Bound Brook, or in 1781, the American Army, the entire Army, and the French Army, who had then joined us, marched to Yorktown. And they crossed the Hudson River, they came down through Suffern, and they marched through New Jersey on 3 different routes. And so they passed through dozens and dozens and dozens of towns, and all of that is recorded. And if you give me the name of your town, I can almost tell you what happened there on that march.
They often say, and they being the general public, that the revolution really kind of centered around New England and Boston and some of the towns and Lexington and that sort of thing. But there was a significant number of battles and movements of troops in New Jersey, and it's sometimes referred to as the crossroads of the American Revolution. Do you think that there are a lot of people who just don't really appreciate and understand the role that New Jersey played, and what role did it play as juxtaposed with New England?
Yeah, well, first of all, few people appreciate what happened here. Going to work, they ride over the route of an army that traveled along that route during the war, don't even know it.
King's Highway.
King's Highway is a good example right here locally. But addressing your New England question, that's where the war broke out. The shot heard around the world, Lexington and Concord, April 19th, 1775. The siege of Boston, Bunker Hill. But in 1776, the war shifted out of New England, and it shifted to New York. The British gave up on Boston, jumped in their boats, and came to New York, where they stayed the rest of the war. And outside of an invasion of Canada, which happened at the same time, the war took place from New York, which was a series of terrible American defeats. And Washington escaped over the Hudson River and was chased across New Jersey to the opposite side of the Delaware. And that was 1776, a terrible year for the American cause. The end of 1776 was a happy ending. Remember the Trenton, the Hessians? Washington crosses the Delaware through the ice in that iconic journey, and he captures Trenton, and he goes on and he captures New Jersey, or he has 2 battles in Princeton after that. So coming into January of 1777, Americans have victories, and they're refreshed, and they almost gave up the cause during 1776. But Washington then goes up to Morristown, where he spends his first winter with his troops, and the British go to New Brunswick. So you have the 2 armies for the whole year of 1777 in New Brunswick and in Morristown. They clash, they come together. Bound Brook is attacked by a huge detachment from New Brunswick of British soldiers. It's an American defeat. Bound Brook is an outpost. About 1,500 people. It's attacked by 5,000 British. Of course, they try to encircle the town. They fail. The Americans escape and run into the first ridge of the Watchung Mountains, called Middlebrook.
Is there any evidence that there was a battle in Bound Brook today? Is there anything there that marks the spot?
Absolutely. Oh, there's a primary piece of evidence which is one of my favorite sites. The British and Hessians attacked over an old arched bridge. That bridge is still there. It's built of brownstone, and it's down at the end of town. It's still there. It's covered over by asphalt. 18-wheelers go over it.
Wow.
And it's
And it was built when, do you think?
It was built in the 1770s.
Holy mackerel.
And the British opened their attack by sending Hessians. They did all the dirty work across that bridge, and they got mowed down. The Americans had a redoubt there at the end of Bound Brook, and but that bridge is still there.
Any historic markers or signs that said this
Yes.
was the site of,
Yep. It was American defeat. Our General Lincoln escaped through a window in his pajamas. The Americans were surprised.
Sure.
If you cross from southbound Brook to Bound Brook, there's a series of signs going over the crossing where the original bridge was.
What's the most well-known of these? You say they're forgotten, but of all the forgotten towns, what do you think is the most well-known spot?
Well, the Battle of Monmouth was
Sure.
a big thing that happened down here. That was 1778, and it was
Which many consider a turning point. Really.
Yes.
Not only for the war, but for Washington's reputation.
Exactly. And it was a standoff. It wasn't an American victory, although a lot of people say it was. The British,
Well, we didn't lose.
we didn't lose. We held the field,
Yeah.
and it was our our farm boys who had been trained at Valley Forge by Baron von Steuben
Yep.
proved themselves for the first time on the plains of Freehold.
And you and I have been out to the battlefield in Monmouth Courthouse, the Battle of Monmouth Courthouse. And one thing I always found fascinating is that we look at these beautifully manicured battlefields today. The grass is cut and it's all mowed, and you can stroll about the grounds and everything. But this was an active series of farms, wasn't it? I mean, there was corn that was high. These guys had to rush through cornfields. In many cases, they couldn't even see each other, and they might come out of a cornfield and, my gosh, there's the British. Isn't that right?
Absolutely. Absolutely true. Yep.
And we had a bit of an advantage, I think. Talk a little bit about the red coats. They wore some very warm uniforms, and in the summer, it paid a price.
Yeah, they say as many people died in the Battle of Monmouth from the heat as were wounded and shot. And the Hessians, for some reason, were very susceptible to the heat. And on the march from Philadelphia to the Battle of Monmouth, many died along the way. And even the evening that they slept after the battle, expecting to fight the next day, which they didn't, some of them died in their sleep from hypothermia. They wore woolen uniforms. The battle is very well recorded, and archaeologists have done a lot of work. There's a big, beautiful state park there. My favorite part of the Battle of Monmouth is the British retreat after the battle and what happened. They started out at Freehold. They went through places like Montrose, Phalanx, Lincroft, Middletown, and they ended up here in Highlands on these ridges that overlook Sandy Hook.
Are we talking 12,000, 14,000?
We're talking
troops?
between 16 and 18,000 men.
So that included the support group that went along with them, or were these just mostly military?
That was plus camp followers
Right.
and all the support people. There were probably 1,200 wagons. The parade itself was 12 miles long. It almost stretched back to Freehold. But that's a fascinating. They all ended up here in the Highlands, and they looked down. They were going to get picked up by their ships to be evacuated to New York. They looked down at Sandy Hook and said, "Hey, that's an island." There was a break in the inlet between Seabright, where Seabright joined Sandy Hook. There was a small inlet there. They had to build a pontoon bridge.
You said 16,000 people that went over there on Sandy Hook?
It was more like close to 20.
So Highlands is one of these places, and there were battles in a lot of different places that are kind of hard to reckon where they were exactly. I know there was something at the top of Route 36 over by Miller, but do we know any more about that, where that might have been?
Yeah, that took a lot of digging in original documents, and it's known as the Battle of Navesink.
Okay.
And it's got quite a story, which I'll give you the short version of. A group of American militia were down on Barley Point, which is now Rumson, where the two rivers join. And they see a shipwreck coming in on Sandy Hook, very close to the Seabright line. And they run up to the shipwreck, and boy, it's an English victualling ship heading for New York. It's full of everything, pork barrels and all the things that they need. And they start removing the things. In the meantime, the British, a Tory amongst the Americans, goes up to the lighthouse and he says, hey, the Americans are stealing everything off that ship. You better get somebody over there. So the British call on a warship called the Siren, and they bring that down here, and they chase the Americans away from the wreck. In the meantime, the militia says, we're going to get that supply ship. They come up here from all the surrounding towns, Middletown, all these towns. They're citizen soldiers.
Yeah.
There are 200 of them. They go up on Route 36, just about where the elementary school is now, and there was a house up there. It was owned by Isaac Hartshorn.
Okay.
And it was a big house. They had a powder magazine there. 200 militia gather, and we're going down to that ship. We're going to drive the British away and take it. Well, they go to sleep. It's at night. The British surprise them. They come across. There's about 200 British, too, and they're going to encircle them. One arm of the pincer goes up Route 36, if you follow it right off the bridge, to get around the militia on Route 36. The others go up Linden Avenue to come around the other way, and they do circle them. The Americans are all asleep. They slaughter them in their sleep. It wasn't the Battle of Navesink. It was the massacre of Navesink.
Oh, my God.
And 200 Americans were there. I think 40 or 50 escaped. And so ends a very tragic event right in our town here.
Now, I heard you say, you pronounced it two different ways. I do it too, just to be politically correct in case someone says something. Navesink and Navesink. And I've heard that the locals, people that have been here for a long time, call it Navesink, and a bunch of other people call it Navesink. What's your take on it?
You can always spot a Benny when he says Navesink.
I guess that's our answer. Bob, you have been referred to as the revolutionary detective, and a lot of your books are sort of like that. They're discoveries that you have made that some other people may not have made, and I know you enjoy that. Talk a little bit about the enjoyment of discovering things, and what did you discover in this book that's sort of...
Well, that's easy. I was reading an account written in 1785, an original thing, and it talks about Washington's lookout in the Watchung Mountains.
Washington Rock.
Washington Rock in Greenbrook.
been
We
there.
all know
It's
that.
wonderful
It's
view.
a tourist mecca. I'm reading this account, and the British talk about General Washington getting up and looking down for a rock. Got to be Washington Rock, right?
Sure.
Wrong. This description of where it was is about 5 miles south of Washington Rock. And I'm saying, what's going on here? So I say, that makes sense, because Washington in 1777 spent 7 weeks in Middlebrook, which is now Martinsville. It's up on that first ridge of the Watchung Mountains. If he was there for 7 weeks, camped, and he camped with his men then, he didn't live in a neighborhood house or anything. He was looking out. He was watching the British in New Jersey, or in New Brunswick, and he was watching every move they made. Now, would he go 5 miles down the ridge to look at those? No, he would have had a bad view. He would have been looking north. He had a rock there. So I find another evidence of it by a group who had gone up there in 1830, and they said, this is Washington's Rock. Then I don't find anything else until I come to a book called, it was written by Benson Losing in 1851. Benson Losing was a prominent American historian. He visits New Jersey, and he says to people of New Jersey, take me to Washington Rock. Well, they take him to Bound Brook, they go up Vossler Avenue, and they take him to the other rock where the campground was.
And there's elevation there.
And there's elevation, and there's a rock, and there's a rock there.
Is there any signage?
Well, no.
There will be now.
There will be now. Anyway, this guy Losing, he describes the exact location of the rock, and he draws a sketch of it, and he puts it in a book. So I get the sketch of it.
Yeah, yeah.
I go out and beat my way through the woods for a week looking for the rock.
Wow.
I'm knocking on doors. There's a few houses up there on the crest
Sure.
of the ridge. And finally, I come to a small museum. It's called the Eagle's Nest. A gentleman comes out with a ferocious dog.
Yeah.
I pull out the picture and said, "Sir, did you ever see anything like this?" And he said, "Yep, it's over there." His name is Herb Patullo.
What
And
a fabulous discovery.
yeah. Well,
And this is in Bound Brook?
this is in Martinsville, above Bound
Martinsville.
Brook.
And did you notify the town so they can start doing the tourism?
Notified the town, notified the county, and on June 16th, 2 weeks ago, we had the grand dedication
Wow.
of the second Washington Rock. I was the speaker. It was a moment of glory. Everybody bought my books. It was just
my
it was
gosh.
a great
So
day.
this discovery is in the book.
It's a whole chapter on that
My
discovery.
God. I've been going to, I used to live in that area, the Watchung Mountains, I guess is what they're
Yeah.
called. And that was a great view. You go up there, and there it was, clearly marked Washington's Rock. And there's no evidence that Washington was actually even at that rock. Right?
Well, yes,
yeah?
there was. When the British moved north after about 5 weeks, they moved north from New Brunswick to Perth Amboy. And when they did that, Washington had to move north with them. So he got on his horse, rode along the crest of the first ridge to what you know as Washington Rock, and he was there for about 4 days when a battle was fought called the Battle of the Short Hills, which was fought in Scotch Plains and Plainfield and Edison.
Yeah.
So he was there for 4 days, but he was at the other Washington Rock for like maybe 4 weeks.
All of these towns, these 100 or so towns that you talk about, were they all the site of battles or skirmishes, or were some of them just strategically important?
Well, a lot of them are passing through. When those 3 columns came down from New York in 1781 on the way to Yorktown, they went through, the French column went through Morristown and took that route. The middle column went down through Watchung and Warren. They all converged at Bound Brook. The other, Washington's column, the one he went with, went through Bergen County, through Elizabethtown, and they all converged in Bound Brook. So it's passed through.
It sounds like Bound Brook is a place to go visit. Are there any other things to see there? Any old homes? Or?
Oh yeah, yeah. They've got magnificent restored old homes. One is the Stats House, where Baron von Steuben spent the time during the Second Middlebrook encampment. There's the houses where all the officers of the Continental Army that you know, Knox, Van Steuben, Lafayette, Washington, they all stayed in different houses. Those houses are all there restored.
Now, you've talked about von Steuben as being integral to the success of our victory, I guess, in a way, and to our independence. And yet, in some cases, he seems like a flim-flam. He seems like he's a bit of a shyster. Was he the real deal? I mean, how did he weasel his way into Washington's army?
No, he wasn't the real deal.
Yeah.
He came over here, recommended, he wrangled a recommendation from Benjamin Franklin, who was in France.
Right.
And he came under here and he said, "This is a recommendation." He wore a great big medal, we claimed to it was given to him by Frederick the Great.
Yeah.
Who knows?
Yeah.
And he was a low-level person in a provincial army in Prussia. And he comes over and he flaunts all these credentials, and he convinces he convinces the Continental Congress to put him in the army.
Could
he
he even
says,
speak English?
didn't speak English. And then he said, "I don't want to be paid." And the Continental Congress said, "That sounds like a bad deal.
Yeah.
Let's send the guy to Valley Forge.
Yeah,
That's a real penalty. They're all dying and starving." And
Sure.
so they sent him to Valley Forge. And Washington hears about this, who is now renowned as a famous German general. He rides out of Valley Forge and he goes to personally meet von Steuben. Brings him into the camp, and von Steuben sees chaos, and he says, "We've got to do something about this, George." So for the winter, he trains the men in tactics, and he has to do it through an interpreter. He uses a lot of profane terms, but he whips the American army into shape. And in the spring, what happens is they leave Valley Forge. Where do they come? They come up through New Jersey and end up at Monmouth Courthouse for the Battle of Monmouth and stand their ground against the best
And von
army.
Steuben was with them.
He was with
that
them.
point.
He was in the field.
What about cemeteries? Do you talk about burial grounds or cemeteries in this book at
Yeah.
all?
Striking thing about cemeteries is there was a lot of dying
On the spot.
on the spot and in winter camps. Now at Jockey Hollow, we lost probably 80 people. Now at Valley Forge, we lost 2,000 people, but by the time they got to Jockey Hollow, they knew how to build cabins and sanitation improved. But we lost about 80 people up there. Where are they buried? They're not buried at Jockey Hollow because Tory spies would count graves. So you never marked your graves, but some of them are in neighboring churchyards, but they're not in Jockey Hollow. You didn't want to do that. It was a giveaway.
Yeah. And the muskets, both the long barrel muskets and the hand muskets, I guess, is that what they're called, the hand muskets?
Pistols.
The pistols. How accurate were they? How close did you have to be to the enemy to get a shot into the head or the heart?
Almost arm's length.
Yeah.
A pistol, they say, was accurate to within 10 yards.
Wow.
And pistols were so hard, and these guns were so hard to load, you had to go through several steps, that pistols were only used by cavalry. Officers on horses would have their loaded pistols. When they were attacked, they'd fire the two. That was the end of the show. They threw the guns away.
So here's I don't know if this is a German pistol.
That's a Hessian pistol.
That's a Hessian pistol, so it's German. So how long would it take to reload this, do you think, after firing?
Well, you had to put some powder in here, then you had to cock it, then you had to put your ball down there, and then you had to ram it down. And a good marksman, a good infantryman could get off maybe 3 or 4 shots a minute. But
have you ever fired any of these?
You don't fire antiques.
Have you ever fired anything that approximates this?
Yeah, I fired modern black powder rifles.
Did you?
Yeah,
Did you?
they got a good kick to them.
I'll bet.
Yeah.
So this, I just want to see this for a minute.
Sure.
This pistol is accurate within about 30 feet or so.
Yeah.
So if I was right next to you, I could probably shoot you dead.
Yes.
But if you were 100 feet away, the odds are probably not in my favor that I'd hit you.
Now with the long rifle, they're not rifles, they're muskets.
Muskets,
the rifle
yeah.
has got spirals in the barrel, but when two armies were fighting, they didn't take aim. They just fired in the general direction. That's how the long rifle was accurate until maybe 50 yards, the musket, the standard American musket, which was either a British-bound Bess that was captured or a French Charleville. But all you had to do was fire in the general direction of the enemy. You didn't take aim. You know?
Did the British fire at will, or were they commanded to fire in unison?
The name of the game in a battle is called linear tactics. And you lined up your men in a long line and put another line in back of them and maybe a third line.
Oh, I see.
The enemy did the same thing, and you fired into one another at point blank range. It was deadly. It's far more horrible than our combat today, which is carpet bombing from 30,000 feet.
Sure.
But and when one of the sides faltered, in rushed the bayonet charge. The bayonet was the M16 of the Revolutionary War, and it was three-sided. The wounds could not be sewed. You either bled to death. See, there's 3 sides. You either bled to death or you got infection. So even a minor bayonet move.
So were more people eventually killed by this or the musket?
I would say the bayonet took most lives. And at the beginning of the year, at the beginning of the war, the Americans did not even have bayonets. But von Steuben trained them in the use of the bayonet. This is actually an original Charleville French musket bayonet. But this was a very important weapon, this old rusty spike.
Have you been on some archaeological digs with regard to the Revolutionary War? Have you ever witnessed anything like that? And then are there any sites that maybe they're covered by asphalt that you'd like to explore or dig?
Well, the Battle of the Short Hills, there was extensive archaeology done there, and there's another battle that's out of state. I have a friend that's one of the nation's most prominent archaeologists. His name is Wade Katz, and he comes from Newark, Delaware. And he found a very important battle down in Delaware that nobody really knew about. It's called the Battle of Cooch's Bridge. He's done extensive archaeology. I've walked the battlefield with him down there. Then we got him up to New Jersey, and he did the Battle of Short Hills. And the Battle of Short Hills, as I mentioned, if you go down Oak Tree Road in Edison and you look up at those little hills, those are the Short Hills. That's Plainfield Country Club was the center of the battle, which nobody knows, another one of my forgotten places. And there's a hill, a rise going up there. They dug there. They did a lot of digs. Found precious little. Some cannonballs, some artifacts. Found precious little on that site. But he has written some magnificent archaeological reports. And the third thing is I've been talking about Middlebrook and the Middlebrook encampment above Bound Brook. The Hunter Research Company out of Princeton did a great job excavating and digging for artifacts in that area, and they found many, many things. Old muskets, bayonets, buttons, foundations, and so forth.
There were, in New Jersey too, there were also quite a mix of loyalists and patriots and British and militia and so on and so forth. Were there any towns that were primarily loyalist towns that we can boycott today?
Well, I'll tell you, the two loyalist strongholds were Bergen County. It was about 50-50 up there. And then you had a bunch of Quakers who were neither on either side. So frequently there were less Americans than British and Quakers. And that occurred in Bergen County. The other nest, the other malicious nest was here.
Yeah, well, I was just going to say,
County.
yeah, right,
Yep.
exactly.
Monmouth County was a lot of Tories, as we call them, loyalists. And why? Because they derived their income from trade with New York, which was British held. So they traded their agricultural goods, and they, of course, were loyal to the British.
And even hundreds of years later, in the 1800s and early 1900s, we were still providing produce and other goods
Absolutely.
Via steamship to New York, weren't we?
Yes, yes.
But there were a lot of loyalists in this area, and after the war, we chased them all out, right? We sent some of them to Canada.
We sent some to Nova Scotia.
Yeah.
We sent some to Ontario. We sent some to the Bahamas. Yeah, they were all chased out. Their possessions were ruthlessly taken by the Patriots, and they were chased out of town, including part of my family. I have a lot of distant cousins that were on the other side. And I got a call one day from a lady in Canada, and she said, Bob, I hear you know a lot about the Revolutionary War in New York. She said, my people were from Haverstraw. And I said, wow, that's where my people are from.
Yeah.
So she said, they left, but they left there several years ago. I said, when did they leave?
Yeah.
And she said, 1783. So I said, they were loyalists, weren't they? And she said, yeah. She says, you were chased out. The Patriots chased women and children out of town at the point of bayonets and took all our possessions.
Yeah, yeah.
And here we are up in northern Ontario.
That's amazing. I hope we got rid of all of them, did we? All of these loyalists and.
Well, you know, a lot of them said Delancey there was a lot of high-ranking loyalists because the British occupied New York, and a lot of top people from the governing body, the Provincial Congress, they stayed in New York and joined the British. So we.
Do you think, looking back in retrospect, that if the British had done some things a little differently, they could have conquered this country and have been ruling it today? What mistakes did they make, do you think?
Well, one of the mistakes they made was poor battlefield tactics. When Battle of Bunker Hill, one of the first battles of the war, you got a bunch of civilian farmers up there hiding behind a log.
Hit and run.
And the British, for the first time, says, we are going to, European style, attack these people and wipe them out. Sure. So they made a frontal assault up the hill at Bunker Hill. They were slaughtered. They lost almost 1,200 men in that frontal charge. And for the rest of the war, the British generals were reluctant to make a frontal charge. So that was
They also, it
tactical.
was also hard for the British too to keep their troops supplied,
Yeah.
because they had to cross the ocean for one thing, or they had to cross with Allied support, but that was difficult. And at some point, didn't the British just say, you know what, it's not worth it. This new country, America, no big deal.
Yeah. One thing was the geography was overwhelming. The immense
We could hide.
line.
We could hide, and we could hit and run. We could hit them from all sides.
Yeah.
We were unpredictable.
And we did.
Yeah.
Washington hid at Middlebrook, would not come down and fight. And we could disappear into the countryside. So the geography was just ponderous. The other thing is, as you mentioned, everything had to come from Great Britain. All the food. And what didn't is they had to forage for the rest of it. And they were militantly opposed when they foraged, because they would go into American farmers, burn their homes, steal their cattle. But the major stumbling block of getting supplies to New York and to the rest of the British was the coast of New Jersey, because our privateers, some of them went out in whaleboats and attacked all the British shipping going up the coast.
Who was one of the semi-famous privateers that
Well,
people would know about?
There were two very famous privateers. One was William Mariner, appropriate name, and the other was Hyler, Adam Hyler. And they worked out of New Brunswick, Keyport, and they worked all the way down to Little Egg Harbor. And a lot of the bodies of water along the coast here are closed. The inlets are closed. There were more inlets. There was an inlet at Deal. There was an inlet. Shark River is still open, but there were several that were ports that are now closed.
Why? Why are they closed now?
They were silted over.
Oh, okay.
And in fact, right here, as we look out on the river, there was an inlet
Right.
right down at the end of Seabright, where you went straight up the
On this side of the
Navesink.
bridge, or
It went from the ocean right straight up the
it
Navesink
was,
River.
oh, I know where it was. Actually, the Navesink River, or tributary,
Yeah,
flowed right out,
that's it.
right out.
You bet.
So if you're on Seabright and you look west toward, or generally west toward the Navesink River, you'd be standing in
Yes.
where the inlet was.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Amazing, amazing.
Yeah.
How many years ago? It was like 350 years ago that the Revolutionary was fought, something like that, right?
Yeah, we had the bicentennial in 1976, which was the year I got started on being a historian, because my dad told me that we had an ancestor that fought in the Revolutionary War. Only remembered his name and where he came from.
Yeah. And was your dad interested at all? I know we've talked about your dad before, but was he interested in history at all?
Yes, he was interested, but knew very little. He would attempt to pass it along to us at a family gathering after he'd had his 2 martinis, gather the children around him. We hated it. We hid under the bed and everything. But we did remember a lot of the things he said, and he had some basic information. This Revolutionary War soldier, John Allison, I would never have known if my father hadn't remembered his name that was passed down through the family, and the fact that he came from Haverstraw on the Hudson River.
Yeah.
That's the only thing I started
Yeah.
with.
So you're getting good reviews, I hear, and the book is available all over the place, fine bookstores everywhere, I would imagine, as well as Amazon.com. And you have a website where people can learn more about all of your books, right?
It's www.revolutionarydetective.com, and I'm proud to say that I have 14 prominent New Jersey historians have endorsed the book, and their endorsements are on the cover, on the back cover.
My gosh. What's next?
What's book number 6?
Yeah.
And it's a work in progress.
Sure,
it's a long
of course
way
it
off.
is. Of course it is.
It's going to be. There's never been a book written about the encampments at Middlebrook, and I'm just going to focus on the Middlebrook encampments. Washington's army was there twice, once for 7 weeks, once for entire winter. It featured in the battles at a very prominent place, and used as a campground. I'm going to write a whole book on Middlebrook. Never been done.
Washington, and maybe this is sort of one of the final questions. Washington at one point was not considered to be a very effective military leader. In fact, people were thinking of replacing him because he just wasn't doing a very good job. Do you think that that reputation changed with the Battle of Monmouth, and how much of that was due to von Steuben?
Well, yes, it did change. Washington, for a period there in 1777, was very unpopular. You had General Gates who won a fantastic victory, the Battle of Saratoga, big American victory, captured all the British troops, made prisoners of them, and they wanted him to take Washington's place. And there was a group of people that were plotting against him to replace him. And what Washington was doing, his army was down in 1780 to about 8,000 people, and 2,000 of them were sick and not fit to fight. And he was hiding in the New Jersey hills and wouldn't come down and fight. And during that period, he got to be very unpopular. Where it changed for him really was at Trenton, that attack crossing the ice-filled river and attacking Trenton, and then winning the two battles of Princeton.
And you are very proud of the fact that you live here on the Shrewsbury River in Highlands, and you've lived here for a while, and you really do enjoy it because, number one, it's a great view, a great house, great town, and a lot of history here. One of the pieces of history is marked with a marker on Sandy Hook, and in fact, I know British tourists come to visit it once in a while and pay their respects. Tell us about that.
Well, back at the end of the war, 1783, the British were starting to take their troops back, and they had a troop ship that anchored for the night in Horseshoe Cove. And 4 sailors escaped from the ship and wanted to desert and run into the countryside. The British captain was furious. He sent at least 12 to 16 men to capture them. It was January, and it was a bitter cold January. The men that were sent to capture these people froze to death, and their bodies were found in Spermaceti Cove.
And it was even in the winter, even though it was freezing, it was a marsh and swampy area they had to come through. And
well, they found their boats, and they should be nearby, and they were all dead. And one of them happened to be a young English lord. He was a lieutenant, aged 20, and they all were young noblemen. And they buried these people, and they put a little monument for them. And the French and the British, around the time of Napoleon, were hostile toward one another. A French ship came through here in the early 1800s, found the monument, and destroyed it. Destroyed this British monument. The bones were lost till about, I think the year was 1913, when they were excavating for a railway here, and they discovered 16 skeletons.
Wow.
And it was the rescuers from the ship.
My gosh.
And in the meantime, this young lord's mother insisted that he put a monument be here, and she put one also. There's a twin monument to that in Trinity Church, New York.
Were the bones sent back to Britain?
The bones were interred in a cemetery in Brooklyn, where they took all the British bodies that they found during the Revolution and put them all together. So there were 50 lives lost that they found in a crypt from the evacuation. After the Battle of Monmouth, 50 people apparently died on Sandy Hook waiting to get rescued. They found that vault with 50 parts of bodies.
Wow.
They took both skeleton remains and shipped them back to a military cemetery, I think it's called Cypress Gardens in Brooklyn. They rest there today. There's a monument there.
Are there any other that you're aware of, monuments in our country, or New Jersey for that matter, that honor the British? I've not heard of any.
There's a tiny one, and you're going to love this, Battle of Monmouth.
Yeah.
The tenant church, the ranking English officer that died there was a fellow, I believe his name was Monckton, and he is buried outside the church. He was buried with full military honors he died after the battle, and there's a marker there. It's his tombstone.
Yeah. I think it's the one on Sandy Hook is probably one of the very few
Yes, it is.
monuments honoring the British military from the Revolutionary
is.
War, isn't it? So
You're
it's
right.
significant, and there's not a lot of places to park over there to see it, but people should go see it. It's an interesting story, isn't it?
It's right on the main strip going out to the lighthouse.
Yeah. I know that the discovery of things and the research of things and the bibliography and all that stuff is a lot of work, but the actual writing, how much fun is that, and what goes through your mind? Are you transported back in time?
The writing, I shouldn't admit this publicly, the writing is drudgery.
Oh,
The
really?
research is fun. But I belong to a group of writers, and there are about 8 or 10 of us, and we meet every week for 2 hours.
Wow.
And we critique one another's work. They've gone through every chapter in there. They're all fiction writers. I don't know how they have the patience to read military history, but they do. And so by the time that got to the publisher, it was pretty well vetted. But publishers being what they are, he took a shot at it too and made a lot of...
Do you ever watch any of these series or movies about the Revolutionary War? And are there any series or movies that you find fairly accurate or interesting?
No. People will see a Revolutionary War picture on TV, and my phone will ring. I say, Bob, you got to get on channel so and so. And when I watch anything on TV, it's cops and robbers dressed in Revolutionary War costumes, and there's nothing that I find very credible out there on the American Revolution. I'm sorry to say that, except some very good documentaries.
Well, this is a fascinating book. And what I love about your books is that you don't have to have a desire to read something about the Revolutionary War. It really is just a good, interesting story about our past, and something we should all be interested in, or at least learn more about. When's it going to become a movie?
Well, soon, I hope. But, I try to write books so the average person can enjoy them. Because if you get a military history person, that is, I try to write them. My test are these other authors in my writing group that I work with. They're all fiction guys and girls. And if they enjoy it, I know it passes the test.
Well, thanks so much for talking with me again.
My pleasure, John.
It's a pleasure knowing you. And I do recommend that you go out and see the battlefield at the Battle of Monmouth Courthouse. A wonderful museum, a great place to stroll around the grounds and that sort of thing. And also now we have a new place to go, and that is Bound Brook, so that we can see the bridge and kind of experience the town and go find the rock. Hopefully the town will do something to make the markers a little clearer for us to find. And you know what I always say, if you see me on that rock or a battlefield or a graveyard or driving in my car, eating at a restaurant, do not hesitate to stop, tap me on the shoulder, introduce yourself, say hello, because folks, nothing is more important than meeting you. So long, everybody.